to the Leadership of Fools. We are ready for a rock and roll episode. We're doing things differently this time around. Long-time shipsters will be used to Colin Beattie being on the ship, but we've thrown him overboard. And our first mate today is Alice Sidhu. Welcome on board, Alice.
Hi, Rick. I'm pleased to be here. I don't know how well Colin is doing since we did ship him overboard.
He'll be right. He can doggy paddle for hours.
He can. I'm sure he'll be absolutely fine and not missing us at all.
And joining us is Adam Ferguson.
Good morning, Rick.
How are you feeling today?
Excellent. Very excited about today's conversation.
Me too, because we've gone high tech. We've gone digital. Alice insists on pushing this podcast into the digital age. And so our fourth crewmate here today is joining us via Skype. It is the very special guest, David Marquet. Welcome on board.
Hey, thank you for having me, bringing me on board. Now, you know, in a submarine, it's hard to throw someone overboard. So I want to right off the bat.
It is. Now, you'll have to be very patient with our very, very poor nautical analogies during this conversation, which we don't normally do. Having said that, it is Leadership of Fools.
Yes.
And so we might actually just give in to the temptation, given that you are a retired US Navy captain, and a big part of what we're going to be talking about is your experience, leading a submarine, a nuclear submarine. So just bear with us.
We've all led nuclear submarines, just some of us better than others.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. It's if it's not that's the differentiator with David. It has to be the fact that he's a best-selling author. I'm not sure how many of us would be able to point to
yes.
that.
I mean, nuclear submarine tick, best-selling author.
Not so much.
I've yet to accomplish.
It's coming, Rick.
Yes.
All right. So there's a lot going on. There are going to be some poor metaphors and nautical analogies. We've already explained that. So, Rick, what's our leadership dilemma for today?
That's a good question, Alice. I'm going to throw it back to you. What
Okay.
is our leadership dilemma today?
Okay. Well, with David,
I feel like you need that responsibility just to really establish yourself as first mate.
Which is really interesting because we are going to be talking about leadership responsibility and empowerment. David, there are so many things I wanted to ask you about, and I know that Adam and Rick did as well after reading your book. And I actually thought we're going to go a little bit left field, and I want to start or explore the leadership conversation around what happens when you as a leader stop telling people what to do.
So first thing you do is panic.
That's just what you want on a nuclear submarine, just that sense of panic.
Right. So first of all, I can't affirm that any of these things actually happen.
Good, allegedly.
There's a couple things. Number one, you can only control yourself. And for a long time, I spent a lot of my life trying to control other people, trying to, quote, motivate them and inspire them and all kinds of words that empower them or engage them. And I'm sure you can add to that list of words. And I got to a situation where at the last minute I got transferred to a ship that I didn't know. And what did I do? I gave orders like any submarine captain normally would, and I gave a bad order. Now, normally when you give a bad order as a leader, you're like, well, I got to give better orders. That's the problem. But when you don't know the ship, because this was a last minute transfer to a different kind of ship, I was like, well, that's not going to work. And so I talked to my guys, and my guys said, well, you know what the deal is, Captain, you can't, you just need to be quiet. And I was a little surly. And I said, really? But when I thought about it, I thought, you know what? You guys are right. So how about I don't tell you what to do, but you got to stop asking me to tell you what to do. We looked each other in the eye, we shook hands, and that was the deal that we made. But the first thing that happens is it goes against your instincts, and it really feels scary. And every day when I was under stress or pressure, I wanted to revert back to just barking orders in the comfortable old way of naval captains.
Oh, there's a lot of really interesting things in what you said there, and one of those is, I guess, the situational leadership, which is that you're on a nuclear submarine. Normally when we as leaders make decisions or have to give guidance, they're not normally matters of life and death in most circumstances. So the risk of some of those decisions and the consequences of those become really, really important. How much of that was a factor in your mind in that type of situation?
Yeah, a lot, and for me, it's counterintuitive. It feels safer when we make decisions and we can control things, or we think we're controlling things. But it's actually safer, but very fragile. And we want to think as leaders that if I say something and it's wrong, if I say something and it's not a good idea, that the team will speak up. This is a fantasy. Okay? And we push and instead of taking control of ourselves and taking responsibility, we push it on our team. Well, you guys got to speak up if you don't think it's a good idea, right? How many times have we heard that? It's on you to speak up. And this is just an abdication of responsibility. And what you really want to do is lean back and let the team lean into you. And even though it feels scarier, it's actually safer. This is one of the conundrums of leadership, because when they lean into you, they are owning it and they are inviting feedback. They're inviting scrutiny. They say, hey, here's what I intend to do. Here's what I plan to do. I'm announcing it to the world. But if you don't stop me, I'm doing it. But it's that announcement to the world publicly before the thing happens that invites the rest of the team to say, yeah, not so much a good idea. Let's talk about it. And it's that culture which makes the team resilient and safe. And I can't tell you how many times on the ship, just fast forward, we got inspected about a year later, and then the ship got the highest score that they'd seen in the Navy. And I asked the head inspector, how could this possibly be? Because we weren't any smarter than anyone else. And he said, the only difference was you guys tried to make as many mistakes as everybody else. The only difference was your mistakes never happened. They didn't propagate through the system because someone stood up. There's an opportunity for someone to catch it and stop it. And most organizations, when they run in a hierarchical top-down way, propagate the errors from the top all the way throughout the organization. And maybe one courageous person stands up and says, I think that's foolish, and then they get fired. But
it must be hard to establish that sort of empowering in the military sense, because I feel like the vibe around the military is that they don't have to be empowered to argue against orders. It's the kind of one thing they're empowered to do is follow orders.
Yeah, there's a really interesting organisational dynamic that plays out, and it's the whole idea of what the structures look like. So what's interesting about your story, or one of the many interesting things about your story, David, is exactly what Rik talked about, which is what the military and naval academies by their nature assume a command and control environment. And so how does that actually happen when you're trying to empower people? What does that sort of look like on a day-to-day
And were you worried that
basis?
empowering your crew might end up in a sort of Crimson Tide situation where they're just itching to sort of mutiny against you? And just any order you give, they're like, nah, lock him in the brig.
Lock him in the brig. Man overboard.
Yeah, man overboard. It's the captain. Well, so first of all, I never used the word empowerment. Our thing was about language. I think there's two things wrong with the leadership development industry, so to speak, of which I'm a part at this point. But first thing is we teach the wrong thing. And the second thing is we teach it in the wrong way. Other than that, everything's fine. So basically, when I say we teach the wrong thing, we're teaching people how to give better orders as opposed to teaching people how not to give orders, how to build a team that doesn't need to be told what to do. That's number one. Number two is we teach leadership like it's a theory, like we teach astrophysics. Otherwise, why would we go to a one-day class and think we know anything about leadership? Leadership is a practice. It's a language. I wouldn't learn football or rugby by going to a one-day class and then ask people, please send us the learning objectives. I got to put the ball at the other end of the field. Now, that's pretty easy.
Yeah, there's still a theory to the game.
No. I'm trying to be sensitive to my audience. And so the problem is, don't tell people they're empowered. That's a meaningless statement. That's a waste of time. What we would do is we would just say, we would focus on the words people use. And I would listen to them very carefully. And they would say things like, hey, I see this. I think this. Maybe I recommend something. And I would say, let's take it to the very next level. Just tell me what you would intend to do if I weren't here. And if I don't stop you, you automatically have permission. And when Stephen Covey visited the ship, he said, quote, it's the most empowering workplace he'd ever seen. But empowerment was never a word that we used. It was just the outcome of people using a different language. So the language is like kicking the ball, running with the ball, throwing the ball. It's the way you what's the word? It's how you exercise leadership is through language.
I think the conversation that tends to happen then is, are leaders walking the walk as well as walking the talk? So that's the whole piece, that sometimes there's that incongruence between what we say and what we do. So Adam, from your perspective, I mean, I know you've read David's book and you're a big fan. How does some of that play out in your organisational context?
Walking the walk? Well, look, I love David's book, and as I read through it, I thought about my own leadership journey and attempted many of the things that David was successful at, and had partial success, but also had some failure along the journey. And so for me, David, I think one of the critical things was I did look to the team to lean in and step back, and I found myself in a situation where I wasn't the domain expert, so really did need to rely on others around me. I think one of the things that really challenged me as I read through your book was really interested that you actually targeted almost the middle managers rather than going top down in terms of the approach. So I was really curious as to why you sort of went to sort of, if you like, the middle managers as opposed to going to those that are reporting directly to you, because I think that might have been where I went wrong.
Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't be so hard on yourself, maybe, but for me, I have a big problem when we say one thing and we do something else.
That's called lying, guys. That's called lying.
Yeah, exactly. And we had this. So our navies are organized very similarly, and we had this thing in the Navy where we would say that the chiefs ran the Navy, and the chiefs were the senior enlisted men. So these are people with high school degrees who'd come up through the ranks, and maybe they'd been in for 8, as minimum 8, 10, 12, 14, 20 years. And they were technical experts in their field. They're the ones who repaired the pumps, loaded the torpedoes, and did all these things. But it was what I would call happy talk. It was a word that we said, oh, the chiefs run the Navy, but it was the farthest thing from the truth, especially in the nuclear Navy. We had this creep. We had this accountability creep where it all went up to the captain. And so he said, well, chiefs, what forms do you sign where you're the last person on the form? None. What reports do you submit? None. What decisions did you make? Well, we make recommendations and they get approved by Okay, so that you're not in charge of anything.
Your impersonation of a chief is excellent, by the way. That was spot on. That's just how I imagined a chief.
Something you're aspiring to be now, Rik?
Oh, I'd love to be a chief in charge of the pumps.
If I had a cup of coffee, I'd be holding it right now. So I gave the chiefs actual authority. When I got to the ship, according to Navy regs, if you wanted to go on vacation or holiday or liberty, we called it, you needed a form that had to be signed by 6 people if you were a junior enlisted person. And so 3 chiefs and 3 officers. And so we eliminated all the officers and we eliminated the 2 junior chiefs. And we said, you know what? We only want one signature. We just want the chief who's in charge of your section. If he says you can go on vacation, you can go on vacation. We don't need any more people. And the phrase we use is push the authority for making decisions down to the people with the information. Most organizations, all hierarchies, suffer from the same illness, which is there's a gap between the authority and the people with the information. And so the normal approach is to push the information, usually with expensive software that we buy to allow us to make stoplight charts, to the people with authority for decisions. But what you want to do is take the authority for making decisions and push it down to the people who can make the information. That makes it more resilient, fun, flexible, and higher performing organization.
I love the statement or the quote there, David, but don't you have to have the right environment and alignment to the direction as to where you're going for that to be successful? Because otherwise people with the information may not know what we're actually trying to achieve.
Yeah, exactly. So by environment, there are 2, we found that there were 2 underlying conditions that needed to be satisfied in order to, quote, empower the team to higher levels of control. One was technical competence, which is what you want. I mean, you don't want someone operating a reactor who doesn't know how. And the second thing is what we called clarity. So it was give control with competence and clarity, and they all had to start with C. So that was why we used clarity. But it's purpose, it's why, it's the context, it's the environment, it's what are we trying to achieve. If people don't understand what you're trying to achieve, then they don't have a guide for making decisions, and you can't divest decision making. You hide that. In fact, I know leaders who intentionally obfuscate the purpose of the organization. So people that were running around, well, we're depending on you, oh great one, to tell us. Right?
Yeah.
And that's just messed up. And then when they leave, the organization falls apart and they go, oh, what
I shouldn't have insisted that everyone call me oh great one. That was my first mistake. Damn it.
That's the new thing. I'm sending a note right now to change my business.
So the competence and clarity are preconditions to making that step where you're, to use the wording, start to empower your team.
Yeah.
And I feel like the objective's quite clear on a submarine. 1, don't let water on the boat. And 2, don't accidentally start a war. I mean, they're the two main things they're trying to achieve every time they're underwater.
Oh, hang on.
That's why you're in charge.
I just want to call out and maybe have David clarify, don't accidentally start a war. Perhaps maybe don't start a war, full stop, should be one of the objectives.
If you're trying to do it on purpose, that's fair enough. I mean, sometimes you've got to start a war. I mean, we all know that.
Yeah.
But you don't want to accidentally start a war.
Hey, we never started. Clear about that.
So
you hit me in the face, so I'm coming after you.
Yeah, this is who goes first.
Allegedly.
Who goes first is kind of important here. Having said that, I want to pick up on what we just made light of. It's the whole thing then around if devolving responsibility for decisions and really playing to what people's strengths are. How do you decide? Because this is to me it seems like one of those fundamental challenges of leadership, which is how do I decide what I have to do versus what I can actually genuinely leave my team to do. And, we're all reading those articles that say, the top 3 things successful leaders do. And the first one is do only the things that you can do. I think one of the challenges is how do I as a leader work out what those things are? Because if you ask someone, they would say, I absolutely need to do everything. I do need to be that 7th signature on the form that you talked about. So how did that work for you, David?
Yeah, so I thought about that, and the list is actually pretty short in my mind. One thing on the list was moral decisions. And for me, this meant the final decision to push a button to launch a weapon that was going to result in the death of a human being. I did not feel that it was within my purview as the captain to let anyone on the crew feel that they had caused the death of some other person, that burden needed to rest with me. So this is the only thing where I said, I will give a positive order to launch the. Now you can load the torpedo, flood down the torpedo tube, open the equalized sea pressure, open the outer door, line it up to the target. You can do all that with intent statements, but the final thing is going to be on me. Number 2, relationships. You can't go to your EA and say, you know what, I want you to have a really good relationship with the chairman of BHP because they're an important client, okay? So that doesn't work. Any kind of relationship. Your own personal level of knowledge. You can't delegate to someone else to, oh, hey, be really smart about XYZ system because I don't really have time for it. And that's where I started. But over the couple of years, I did add one more, which is training. I think you want to get out of the business of telling people what to do, but training, learning is okay. Having seminars where we would do a lot of thought seminars. It's sort of like Einstein's, what would it look like if I were traveling at the speed of light? So, hey, what would happen if this? And we would create these sort of storylines, and then I would let the officers talk through it and participate in the conversation. Sometimes there were right answers, sometimes not. Sometimes it was more about just thinking through tough problems. But I think that's a critical role for leadership. But if it's not one of those things, I'm not sure you need to be doing it.
That would be very confronting, I think, for a lot of leaders or aspiring leaders as well, who would I guess through necessity or preconception, presume that they have to do everything. And so it takes, it seems to me, as you were talking about that, a fair degree of confidence in your own ability to step back, because there is that letting
Yeah.
go. There's the whole idea of the risk piece, which is, what risk am I prepared to take for the consequences of decisions or mistakes that my team might make? And then just general EQ around saying this is what I'm good at and this is perhaps what I'm not so good at and may need to, augment or rely on someone else. And that can be really confronting and challenging for, as we said, some leaders. So were you already at that point when, you landed on the Santa Fe, or did you come to that through the process of what you were experiencing?
So my problem was I didn't give a...
This is Australia. You can say it, I think. Rik, can you say it?
I'll allow it.
But it is Australia. Yeah, I didn't give a shit. Here was the deal. All I wanted was to be a submarine captain. I didn't care about getting promoted. So I was released from any sort of bureaucratic nonsense. And I call it care, don't care. Care passionately and deeply about the people that have been entrusted to your leadership and what you need to achieve, but don't care about sort of the personal consequences to yourself. And I think for me, that mindset freed me so much that we were able to do things that other submarine captains who were always looking for the next star weren't able to do. And ironically, made me much better as a submarine captain than I would have been had I been worried about. Because what happens is you play it safe.
Yes.
You don't go to the very edge. And all those people who are playing it safe, they're just eating oatmeal for the rest of their lives. It's just mush. So I just think, this isn't a dry run for your real life, right?
Yeah.
So no one in a boardroom is going to get shot. What is the problem with these? There's nothing to be worried about.
So that letting go, I think for me in my own career was, moving from an individual contributor to a manager. As a manager, I was still sort of, if you like, the quarterback or the halfback directing play. But that step going to a manager of managers where I just made the realisation that I couldn't actually play that role anymore and my leadership couldn't scale was the moment that I actually let go and went, okay, there's got to be a different model. And I think to your point, David, it creates a bit more freedom.
There's something there, though, isn't there, about the degree of personal risk you're prepared to take? Because the idea is really that if you're, and we've all seen this, it plays out quite differently depending on the circumstances. When you have a leader who is worried about playing politics,
Yep.
then the decisions they make are quite different. So I can imagine that having you come on and say, I'm just here to do the right thing in the right way or in as best way as possible would be very, very different. Trying to think of what I can say that's appropriate there. Rik, sorry, you look like you want to add something there.
No, I just was liking the image of the leaders in the boardroom playing it safe and the submarine captain, under the ocean, flying by the seat of his pants. Just
I have.
Yeah.
I know there is something there.
So yeah. Look, I was working with a private equity group a couple months ago. So these guys have private jets, and they're investing. One of their sort of core areas is fintech, financial technology. So they're starting all these companies, and half these guys running these companies are going to be billionaires. Blah blah blah. And the guy comes up to me and he says, this is a very high pressure situation. Our people work under a lot of stress. I'm not sure you understand. And I go, wow, that's great. Talking to a guy who ran a submarine, right? I said, no. So what could happen? Millions of dollars are at stake.
Yeah.
I lose my bonus. And I said, are your kids not going to go to college? Oh, no. Well, of course. I got that covered. Blah, blah. Is anybody going to die? Are you going to get shot at? Are you going to lose a limb? And he looks at me funny, and I was like, well, I don't really see the risk in that. But they didn't have that.
I'm not sure that he would have appreciated your perspective. I actually spent a little bit of time working in government, and as you would know from the US as well, in public sector, the implications of decisions are often very frequently and rigorously scrutinised, and so there is a very risk-averse perspective around what decisions I make, and in some cases, doing nothing is a better alternative to doing something that may or may not go right.
Scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the question is, are we trying to avoid errors or achieve excellence?
Yes.
And most organizations are trying to avoid errors. So, when Rik described the goals of a submarine, he said, well, I don't want to start a war, and I don't want to...
Accidentally.
I don't have an accident. And when I got to the ship, this is exactly what people thought. So if your objective is not to do something, then the best way not to do something is not to do anything.
Yeah.
And the whole organization grinds to this halt, which is pretty much describes government. And so what you want is we're going to achieve excellence. Yeah. So go watch some superhero movies. Are they flawed? Yes. Do they make mistakes? Yeah. That's what makes it good. Are they perfect? No, of course not. But they're striving for excellence, which results in a bias for action. And so this is one of the things that you've got to shift in the organizational culture is, are we worried about... I was at a big European company a couple months ago, and this company, global multinational company, and they've been lambasted in the news recently. They're not doing so well for being slow-moving and arthritic. And I walk in for my session, and there's this big poster on the wall. There's the CEO, and the CEO who looks like this sort of, old beard, gray, grizzled white guy with a finger pointing out, one mistake is one mistake too many.
Right.
And I'm like, do you think there's a connection between this poster and your guys' inability to make bold decisions? Oh,
Right.
do with it.
Yeah.
Okay, whatever.
It's really interesting because, we're living in this digital age and everybody is looking to, Silicon Valley. I'll leave the venture capitalists you mentioned for a moment and their big bonuses. But certainly everybody is looking to Silicon Valley and, looking to replicate the success of those stories. And everything that's startup is hot. Everything that's digital is hot as well, or cool. Either end of the heat spectrum there.
Anything but tepid.
Anything but tepid. And so part of, what a lot of organisations are looking at is to transplant those types of cultures and that type of thinking into their organisation. And a big part of that is, getting around the table and saying, yes, failure is okay. The organisational dynamics and constructs, though, certainly do not allow failure to be okay. One of the things that I was really interested in was, given your context, which is, as you reminded us, Rik, a nuclear submarine, how do you make it safe for your team to understand that mistakes are okay, given the implications and potential consequences of that? Because that is part of the learning. So how does that play out?
Yeah, so because we operated with intent, any mistake that was made was mine, because I always had a chance to stop it. If you said, hey, I intend to submerge the ship, here's why, and here's why it's the right thing to do. And it turned out, and he looked at me and I said, okay, or very, very, very well. And it turned out later was not a good idea. Well, it's kind of hard for me to blame that person for that. And so that's why I love this idea of intent. I've got some teams that'll say, we can do better than intent. We just want people to just Nike do it, just do it. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I don't really like that, because when in a culture of intent, what happens is people are publicly announcing what they plan on doing before they do it. And that allows so they're inviting scrutiny. They're asking other people to give them feedback ahead of time. It hasn't even been done yet. And there's another psychological phenomenon called information avoidance, where people, once you get close to a decision, actually stop seeking information because they're worried that they're going to come across a piece of information that may cause them to realize their decision is bad, or it just makes them more complicated. And so it avoids those things. And I really liked intent as the sweet spot there.
Is that what Hollywood would refer to? I've seen too many Hollywood movies. Plausible deniability. Is that the type of
Yeah,
thing that
you
you're referring
don't.
to?
You don't. Yeah, you to make it safe, you can't have plausible deniability.
Yeah.
You got to be in it, right? And it's great to be talking about safety here, because the whole point is when you lean back. Adam may have a story about this, but as you lean back as a leader, if they're not leaning forward, it's not because they don't know. It's because they don't feel safe enough to do that. And so the whole idea is about making it safe. The other thing is you got to be vulnerable. And I was like, yeah, whatever. And so because I'm about language, I said, well, what is the language of vulnerability? And for me, it was things like, I'm not sure about this. Any kind of uncertainty or ambiguity coming from a leader is probably a statement of vulnerability. Hey, I'm not sure. I don't know. This might be wrong. What am I missing? Any of those kind of statements invites the team and says, oh, this person's human too. And it makes it easier. You want to lower the barrier for them to challenge you. You don't want to make it higher.
So if I do correlate that to my own experience, and I come from a technology background, David, and you want a level of innovation, and it's a design process, and a lot of the movement from waterfall approach to an agile movement, which has certainly swept the world, is how do you find out the information that you don't know? How do we go and prototype something? How do we build something where we go and test it with our customers and get feedback really quickly, so that iterative loop kicks in really quickly, which is, I think, what you're speaking to in the sense of this is what I intend to do, and inviting feedback into the process. And it's the same in an agile process. Building any type of product is it's inviting customers to give you feedback on whether you're actually solving the problem or not. And certainly the mistakes that I think a lot of organisations, and we certainly made it, was not inviting that feedback early enough into the process.
Thinking we know.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the leadership trap, isn't it, that we all think we know.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if the sort of the work that you've done and the good results you had as the captain of the submarine and the process that you went through, did that have palpable change on the way other people were running it, or were you just kind of a flash pan? This nuclear submarine was run really well by this guy, but we haven't been able to replicate it?
Yeah, it would have been a flash pan, except for the fact that 10 of the officers end up getting promoted over the next 10 years to submarine captains. And they carried forward this idea.
It's like the assistant coaches on the successful sporting team becoming their own coaches. Exactly. I love it.
Right. And actually, that is the final chapter in the book. All the rest of it is just to hook people into this idea, because we're sort of locked into the short term. Oh, I want to make things better tomorrow. But you can make things better tomorrow just by being lucky and smart and giving right orders. But what you can't do is create leaders who can go out and replicate it, because you haven't taught them how to think or make decisions. You've just taught them how to execute your will. So the idea is, by leaning back, they learn how to be leaders, and then they can go out and do the same without you. So the answer is yes. So if you go on any submarine now, you'll hear the language of I intend to.
I kind of want to explore this question around the cultural piece, because I can see a lot of organisations, again, I've been part of them and worked with many who've said, well, look, all of these things are okay. It's just, people won't do what we want them to do. I have heard that. I've told people I can empower them. I don't know why it's not working, all of those types of things. And, it's really difficult sometimes to unpack the cultural, I guess, biases and inertia and skepticism that accompanies a new leader coming into a role and saying, this is what's going to happen. This is what I'm all about. Your context in terms of what you found when you landed on the sub, in those initial few days and weeks was really interesting, because you didn't have a high-performing, or what we would call a high-performing team. And so I'm just really interested in hearing from you about, what you were thinking, what you saw, and how you started to actually implement some of the strategies that you were talking about.
Yeah, I was thinking, oh, shit. And the problem wasn't that it was not a high-performing organization. The problem was I didn't know all the details of the ship. So my normal comfort in being able to be the knowing, telling leader was gone. But here's the thing. You can only control yourself. So for all these people who are saying, well, my people, we won't, I told them they could be empowered, but they won't be empowered. So I said, well, what's happening? Well, so who makes the decision? Well, I do. Why is that? Because they won't come forward. No, it's because you lost patience and you decided to tell it. If you just simply won't make a decision, they're going to eventually do something. But that's the wrong way to go. It's to say, I used to make decisions, now you make the decisions. That's a big step backwards. You want to just take a tiny step backwards. And the first step back is only describe its description. Tell me about it. And so you just have to think about the words that you can say to make it safe for them to step forward. And here's the first activity we give all the CEOs that we coach. Go to dinner 10 times at a restaurant and don't order. I think we talked about this when I was down in Sydney. I don't know if you tried it, but I think it's super interesting because what happens is two things. One, you have to live with this sort of anxiety of what am I going to get? And number two is you have to judge the server's comfort with choosing for you. And some of them are going to be fine, and some of them will not. And you have to make it safe for that person to make that decision for you. And this is exactly the same thing that happens at work. So you can't just do it once because you may get a server who's fine with it and say, oh, that was easy. It was no big deal. 10 times you got to do it. But the idea is you can practice this idea of giving up control in a small, safe way in very safe environments like a restaurant.
So Dave, one of the I think aspects of your book that has really challenged me is this driving change through getting the right behaviours and then the mindset following, or getting or I've come from a belief of let's get the right mindset and belief system and the behaviours will follow. And if I think about myself and just reducing the sugar intake I have, I started to believe that sugar was bad for me. So I started to reduce the amount of sugar. But the belief system led the behaviour. Whereas I think you're suggesting that there are times where you're actually better off just getting the right behaviours going and having the mindset follow. So I've been challenged by that idea. Can you give us a bit more perspective there?
Well, yeah, so I think for yourself, you're right. You have to choose you're going to eat less sugar. And you make decisions which will then affect it. And it probably stems from a mindset. But when you then extend it to other people, you're in the position of either you can somehow convince them and exhort them and cajole them that sugar is bad for them, and they may or may not come around. Or, if you have kids, you just don't have candy in the house, which is easy, right? Don't have candy. That's all I'm saying. I'm saying like let the action result in the behavior that you want. Now, not eating sugar is a pretty simple thing. A lot of the time, what we're trying to do in organizations is much more complex. It's things like, I want you to have risk-embracing behavior, but just enough, not too much. And I want you to have this collaboration, just enough so that you get as much maximum amount of information. But we can't slow decisions. We can't collect information forever. So at some point, we're going to commit. So all these things are nuanced. And here's what it felt to me. Trying to change people's mindset was akin to saying, you're all screwed up. Your head's all wrong. Let me help you fix it, which was very threatening to a lot of people versus if I said, you know what, why don't you try saying it this way instead of that way? It was like, oh, okay, fine. It was like, pass the salt and pepper. It was no big deal. And then 6 months later, they're like, oh my gosh, I've been Jedi mind tricked because now I'm actually that sugar's bad for you because I haven't eaten sugar for 6 months. Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. So yeah, for yourself, I do think you're exactly right. I think you got to make a decision and a commitment. But when it comes to changing others, I always find that it goes the other way.
Yeah, for sure. I like the idea of people listening to the podcast and just getting the completely garbled message, like walking away going, right, David Marquet said no candy in the house. Got it. David Marquet said never make decisions and never order in a restaurant. Got it. All right, I'm ready. I'm ready to captain a submarine.
I don't need to buy the next book now. I know. Well, it's kind of it's interesting because to the point though, it's those 1,000 little things versus the big aspirational statements, isn't it? Because that's what we're all kind of looking to do in terms of modifying our own behaviour and certainly looking to lean into everyone else around us. What was the feeling when you started doing this amongst the crew, David? Because there was was it the officers, I think I recall reading, who you mentioned were not necessarily there for a long time, had not intended to necessarily have a career with the Navy and were probably a little bit disengaged, hadn't been trained. And so, not exactly a recipe for a highly motivated, inspiring team. Obviously, things changed very quickly with them. But how did you actually, deal with that, and how did they manifest some of those things?
Yeah, so it was varied, I'll be honest. Of course, I thought everyone loved it, but...
we always do. It's our leadership fail, isn't it?
So what happened was, like 2 days, we went to sea. I made this mistake. I gave a bad order. I made this decision not to give any orders. And 2 days later, we were having an inspection, a pretty significant inspection where 3 days we were driving around, shoot torpedoes and missiles, and a bunch of people were evaluating us. And the ship actually did okay. And I'd only been the captain for a couple of weeks and only 2 days at sea. And people were shocked and amazed. How did they not totally bomb that inspection? And it was a mystery to me. But now that I've got myself educated with some psychology, I think what happened was this. My thinking was we're going to get better and then people will then be happier. First, we're going to improve performance and then we'll improve morale. Morale follows performance. And I think what happened was the opposite.
Right.
So when I said to the team, hey, you're in charge of your lives. And, oh, by the way, there's no they on Santa Fe. So we're all one team. We were enforcing that. And the third thing was I did the uncool thing of talking about the mission of the ship in the context of Western democracy and making lives of human beings better. This was not a cool thing to talk about. And I think those three things, the combination of being on a team for a mission that mattered and having control over your life, made them happier. And not in the sense of, foosball and beanbags, but in a very deep, satisfactory way. And that happiness freed up their prefrontal cortices, and they actually became smarter human beings because the stress was keeping them out of their brains. And that allowed them to be better. And that happened very, very quickly. It was shockingly fast how that happened.
Is there any foosball and beanbags on a submarine?
Yeah, no.
Oh, surely there's a little breakout room. Come on.
Maybe it was just the lack of candy on the submarine that actually freed up their minds.
He runs a tight ship.
Well, there's no gym. I remember listening to something that you were talking about and things that you don't think about there's no, obviously not that. And there's also no gym on a submarine either, David.
Right.
Which is why you can't have Navy SEALs on there. It's a completely... Rick is looking at me like, why are you even talking about this, Alice?
I would have imagined there would be a gym.
We have a couple of rickety exercise bicycles for 140 guys. It's not very good. So... Go ahead.
No, you're right.
Well, I was going to tell a story about the SEALs. Alice was leading me into that. So So submarines are like Uber for SEAL teams, right? SEAL team wants to get somewhere, they got to call us. We take them there.
That's such a cool analogy, David. That is awesome.
Yeah. Or Lyft or whatever you want. Anyway, so the SEALs, we're like, hey, we'll just carry them with us. Because what happens is they're like, no, we can't stay on board for more than a few days because our highly attuned athletic bodies will deteriorate with every passing day. I'm like, are you serious? But the Navy actually agreed and said, no, they're going to get a ride at the last minute so they can stay ashore, work out. And so we have to pull the ship away from the coastline and rendezvous with a helicopter out at sea. So anyway, you go out there and you do that. And so what happened, like you're the captain, right? You're standing on the bridge. The helicopter comes. You can't even see what's going on deck. 11 seconds later, it flies away. In the meantime, they've dropped the rope. 11 people fast roped down on the deck, come forward, go down the hatch, shut the hatch. It all happens very quickly. And when there's a helicopter there, no one can hear anything. It's like, so if anyone's thinking you're going to tell anyone what to do, they're in fantasy land. If you haven't created a team that knows what to do without being told, when you get to that moment, you're done. And that's what I see leaders do. They don't do the hard work ahead of time. The hard work ahead of time is boring. Let's do it again. Let's practice it again. Let's talk about it again. How it's going to go. What's going to happen. Oh, that's so boring.
Yeah.
Let's do it in fair weather, bad weather, medium weather, sun, light, dark, rain, snow. Oh, my gosh, Captain. It's now not going to be all of these. Yeah, I know, but we don't know which one it's going to be.
Yeah. Is it worth us starting a rideshare app explicitly for Navy SEALs so they can open their app and all the submarines in the area pop up and you've got a rating and they're like, oh, the Santa Fe, that's only got 4.6. Oh, no.
Because it doesn't have a gym.
Yeah, you can just put an S in front of Uber too and it's got sub in the title. It's like Suba.
Oh.
Nice.
I like that.
Yeah. Your driver has done 997 trips.
I just want to make life easier for our Navy SEALs.
Yeah.
Known for good conversation.
David, I'm imagining some of our listeners listening in and going, look, this all makes great sense. I want to empower my team. I want them to show intent. I want them to feel some sense of purpose. And have increased morale, but that's just not going to work in my organisation because of the other leaders around me. What would you say to someone who might be going through that thought process?
Yeah, hey, you're responsible for your team. Is it easy? No. If it were easy, we wouldn't need to be doing podcasts on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Full state of the world. But like I said before, this is not your practice life. You know, you're gonna regret doing the right thing for your team 30 years from now. You say, "Oh yeah, I really wish I hadn't stood up for my team. You know, one too many times." I don't think so.
Yeah.
So the problem is there are a lot of things in human that are baked and hardwired into human nature that were great for the last 100,000 years when we were evolving and where life was. You know, we lived to be 30 and then we died. And it was
Those were the days.
Yeah, I know. It was so great. You know, short, brutish, and harsh. But they don't help us now. Okay, and they don't help us now. And so for example, hierarchy. Mammals all create hierarchy. You put two mammals together, they're immediately got to figure out where they are in the hierarchy. And then step two is you got to climb the hierarchy. So that's why all these marketers put, you know, the logo on the outside so that everyone else can see that you're wearing, you know, so-and-so's glasses. And it's all about social hierarchy. But in an organization, steep hierarchy inhibits communication. So what you actually want to do is to deliberately flatten the hierarchy. And this comes against your instincts.
Yes.
Because when you're the top dog, you're like, yeah, it feels good. Everyone comes up closer. Yep. Oh, your ideas are the best. Yes.
It's about protection usually at that stage, isn't it? As opposed to disseminating that.
Yep. We are coming to the end of our time here of this fascinating discussion, nuclear submarine-based discussion that we're having. So are there any final thoughts, comments, questions before we wrap it all up?
Adam?
No, look, I think it's been fascinating. So I love the topic and I love your story, David, and very excited about what comes next for yourself. Probably a question that comes to mind is how, as you've gone around and spoken to lots of different organisations and seen the challenges that they're facing, is that much difference to what you faced on the submarine, or what have you learned since going out and speaking to other organisations?
This may come as a disappointment, but what I've learned, along with everything else, humans everywhere want the same thing. Okay? Humans want a better life for themselves and their families. Humans want, I can't tell you how many times I went into a company in India or China or Singapore or South America where people would say, oh, these people, they're not going to, they just want to do what they're told. They're happy doing what they're told. They're happy with their crappy little lives. And, they don't want, that's crazy, right? That's just crazy. We may be starting from different places. They may be longer cultural biases against standing up and telling your boss that they're an idiot. But that's why it's even more important for the boss not to give orders, to make it easier for those people to speak up. And I've had multiple experiences where the Westerners who maybe were owning these companies would tell me that, and then I would go in and talk to their people, and they were like, "No, that's that white man crap you're laying on us. We want a better life. We love having control, And there's this universal desire to improve ourselves for ourselves and the people who come after us.
I don't find
and we got to tap.
That's not disappointing, David. I think that's a great story.
Yeah, that's the whole point, isn't it? Which is, I think at the heart of it, we're all human and we want to be treated, respectfully, and we want to do something that matters. Everybody wants purpose. We all want to work in an environment where we feel like what we do matters. And we all want to work with really good people, smart and interesting people. And sometimes that's actually harder to achieve than others. As leaders, we want to create that environment. And as individuals, we want to work in that environment. I never thought that I would want to be on a submarine, but if there was anyone that I would want to have been on, it would have been the Santa Fe while you were on it and leading it, David. So reading your book and listening to what you've been talking about today and sharing really generously with us has been really inspiring. So I just want to say thank you for your time. I'm really looking forward to the new book coming out. You said it was out next year. Is there any sort of sound bite that you want to give us about what we can expect from it?
My new book's called Talk Like a Leader. And the idea is that the language that we naturally fall back on is the language is formed in the past, obviously. And the language is an industrial age language. And so the words that we use are industrial age words. And if we're not very deliberate about the choice of words, we're going to fall back on industrial age words. So, for example, we have a preference for binary questions. Is it safe?
Yes.
Is it the right? Are you sure? Are we good here? So they're binary, self-affirming questions. All day long, this is what I hear. And you really want to do the opposite. How safe is it? What am I missing? That kind of thing. And so I'm collecting stories about language.
That sounds really interesting. I read something recently that which I wasn't aware of, which is that the human brain likes certainty, and when there's uncertainty, it processes it in the amygdala. So there you go. So I can see why the importance of things like the language becomes really important. David, thank you.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating discussion. Thanks so much for everyone joining this ship today and having nuclear submarine-based discussions. That was illuminating and enjoyable. You've all been amazing, and I think we can all agree we achieved this podcast's overriding objective. We didn't let water on the boat, and we didn't accidentally start a war. Well done, all.
That's all we can say.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.